remember that those are sort of the things that we need to remember as we're going through. Yeah, some families are still joining us, which is totally okay. But I'm so excited to introduce all of you to Jill Heinerth. She is an author and an explorer and a filmmaker and a photographer and a cave diver and a Canadian Geographic explorer. And she has probably one of the coolest jobs I've ever heard about. And we met her a couple of years ago at Connected North. We were introduced through Canadian Geographic, and she connected to some students in Iqaluit, which was really awesome, and talked about her experience as a diver. And in the meantime, she wrote this amazing book called Into the Planet. So she's going to talk a little bit about her experiences as an author, a cave diver, and an explorer. And Jill, we have 20 families here with us so far. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let's talk about being an explorer.
All right. It's awesome to be here with you all today. And I'm going to share with you some pretty mind-blowing pictures. And afterwards, we'll have a chance to chat. So right now, I'm first going to share my screen so that you can all see it too, and wind through some of the pictures. So here, Into the Planet, I like to say that the ocean starts beneath your feet. Wherever you live in the world, you are connected to your water resources that eventually lead out to the ocean. Now, my job is that I am an explorer. That actually is my real business card. And I'm an underwater explorer, which is a little bit unusual. And I do specialize in caves. But you might find me underneath the ice in the Arctic, or even, on top of the ice in Lancaster Sound here in the Northwest Passage, camping out and shooting films for CBC. You might even find me in the middle of the Sahara Desert, in places where you wouldn't imagine that there are places to dive. But there are. Even under the Ural Mountains in Siberia, there are beautiful places, caves to dive in these remote places. Oops. Advance there, even inside volcanoes. So this is the Monte Corona volcano in the Canary Islands, where I was cave diving inside lava tubes. Most of the time I'm carrying camera equipment so that I can bring back images and video for people to see. Like this video, I'm just going to cue up from inside the caves. Now, when most people think about cave diving, it's terrifying to them because it's full of water, it's dark, it's claustrophobic. That's normal. They think of darkness. But for me, I see these cave spaces as an opportunity to go to a place where nobody has ever been before. And that's an incredible opportunity. Sometimes these spaces are small. That's usually what you see on TV because it looks so dramatic. But at other times, some of the spaces swim through are so big, I could put your entire home or several buildings inside of an underwater cave beneath the surface of the earth. Now, these places are museums of natural history where we can learn about the Earth's past climate and many other sciences as well. Many cultures use these spaces as portals to the underworld. And we also find like the bones of extinct animals in these places. And as you can see, some of these underwater caves are incredibly beautiful. It's almost like swimming through a crystal chandelier of rock or through a field of icicles hanging from the ceiling. It's absolutely stunning. So for me, it's an incredible opportunity to swim through these spaces inside our Earth and bring back images for other people to see. So caves are worthy of investigation. They're important places. Like I said, museums of natural history where we can see, beautiful geology and rock formations. And then we can also see the things that people have left behind inside these caves when they weren't filled with water. So at times when ocean levels were lower and these caves were dry. But today, I swim through these spaces and I almost think of them like they're the veins of Mother Earth because they carry drinking water. They carry beautiful water that support humanity and natural resources and even the industries that we get products from. So I'm inside the sustenance of the earth. And I like to remind people, like we all kind of know from coronavirus these days, that everything on our planet is connected. And that's certainly true with viruses, certainly true with water. So anything that we do, any place on the earth to our water resources, eventually comes back around to affect our drinking water resources or the health of our oceans. And that's why we care about the water that's beneath our feet. So where I work in underwater caves, we think of it as kind of the beginning of the pipe. So rain falls to the surface of the earth, it soaks into the ground, and it ends up in these vast spaces that I swim through. I hope that many of you are going to be working to protect our water in the future because protecting water resources is a very, very important issue for the next generation. Is when water soaks into the ground, it can carry with it pollution too. It can carry things from, agricultural fields like this. Um, Water can run off of surfaces and run through storm water conduits and drains, and it can travel beneath the landscape, beneath cities, and then ends up in our aquifers. Those aquifers spill out of caves to feed springs, and those springs create the sources of creeks and rivers and streams. And those creeks and rivers and streams flow downstream and feed estuaries. They take care of animals like these beautiful manatees here. So they support wildlife, humanity, industry. Um, and they also, go to places where we live, where we appreciate. Like we tend to move towards places that have water because we like to live on the water. But when we do that, anything that happens and feeds into that water will eventually carry pollutants even offshore into the ocean. So my caves are connected to the ocean, and so is your drinking water. And we have to remember that we have a bit of a quality and a quantity issue. We have lots of water on the planet, but we are running out of clean sources that we can afford. So that's why me swimming through underwater caves can be important for protecting the water security of the future. Now, I work with many different types of scientists, and I started my exploration career long before you were born, back in the 1990s, when we were searching for the world's deepest cave, because caves are even inside spaces like this, inside a mountain. So if I slice this mountain open, you might see a map that looks like this, with like more than 50 miles. That's like almost 100 kilometers of passages in this particular map inside this mountain. So you would crawl into a hole in the top of the mountain and climb down through spaces and cracks and crevices in the rock, through waterfalls and streamways inside the earth. In this cave, there are over 1,560 vertical meters of passageways. But when a caver ends up at a spot like this, where they can't go any farther unless they swim or go underwater, some cavers give up. But for me, that's when my work begins. That's when I'm the happiest, is getting into the water to swim deeper into the mountain, deeper into the planet. Now, a little bit more than 20 years ago, I was part of this project where we used a special life support technology that's very similar to what an astronaut uses to extend the range of our exploration. That device that we use, the life support equipment, is called a rebreather. And on this project, we made the first ever accurate three-dimensional map of any subterranean, that's below the surface, space. And so I'm driving this big vehicle through the cave and making a map as I go. I'm wearing this very complicated equipment that recirculates all of my life support gas. So like I said, it's just like the equipment an astronaut uses for a spacewalk. And swimming into the cave, I'm wearing these rebreathers, I'm carrying extra scuba tanks, I'm driving a scooter, but I'm also carrying a second one in case the first one breaks down so that I can get home. So I go off into the cave and I swim along on my mission. And then when I come back, I have a very long time before I can slowly return to the surface. But when I'm in the cave, there are these guys that are running around on the surface of the earth, tracking a signal that I'm carrying beneath the surface of the earth. And when they're running around on the surface, when I'm swimming beneath their feet, I'm going in places like this, like through an actual golf course community, underneath this person's patio. In fact, I went right underneath their house. I even went underneath this Sonny's barbecue restaurant, underneath the salad bar, and I was almost 100 meters beneath this restaurant. Now, that mapping device that I drove for 20 years ago has been in development ever since then, and now it's a self-swimming, autonomous robot. So that orange device is the new mapper, and it can actually swim through the cave without my help because it has its own brain, it's artificially intelligent, and it has thrusters, and it can drive through the cave, make a map, and come home again. Now, some of the other interesting work that I've done has been in Antarctica, where I was the first person to cave dive inside an iceberg. So about 20 years ago, the largest piece of ice in recorded history, a piece of ice about the size of the island of Jamaica, calved away from Antarctica. And I led a group to go down there and go cave diving, both under the iceberg and inside passages inside the iceberg. So that was an incredible opportunity for me. Now, other scientists that I work with a lot of biologists, and these biologists look at the animals that live inside caves, animals that don't need sunlight. In fact, they live by what we call chemosynthesis. And these animals have no eyes and they have no pigment, but they can hunt in the complete blackness and find things to eat. So here in this little video, you can see one of these animals swimming inside this jar. And he's only like a few centimeters long. I'll loop this again. But he has venomous fangs and pincers and can attack something 40 times his size and neutralize it. So pretty amazing animal. And he lives in beautiful places like this cave here. Just, I think, one of the most beautiful places where I could ever imagine living. Now, I also work with archaeologists and paleontologists who are looking at things that are left behind in caves, things left behind by previous civilizations, and then also the bones of extinct animals left behind in these caves. So here, we're inside a cave in Mexico, and we've actually rappelled down rope from a hole in the ceiling to get into the water and look at everything that's in this mountain of debris beneath the surface. So here we find things like this cow skull underwater, or this really interesting cow skull that actually has silver on his teeth. So he's like an artifact that's left behind. We also find some cool pottery like this that were left behind by Mayan people. And this would have been like a ceremonial pot. We also find left behind the remains of Mayan people themselves that might have been a part of a funeral practice or maybe even ceremonial practice as they were trying to call their gods to send water during times of drought. Now, we used to have to bring some of these bones out for scientists to look at, but sometimes the bones are actually embedded in the floor of the cave, and we don't want to damage them. So we found a better way to study these remains by actually scanning them. This is the skull of an extinct sloth, kind of a bear-like animal that I scanned in the cave in Cuba, and I brought the data to the scientist instead of bringing the bones, so I could leave behind the bones. And today, we can also scan like an entire part of a cave so that we can show a scientist where a piece of pottery is beside a bone, beside, you know, a piece of wood, or even beside a part of the cave that looks like it was painted. And beyond just giving the scientists the data, we can also give the scientists a device like this. This is called a HoloLens that enables someone to see an actual hologram, so a three-dimensional scan of what we found in the cave. So here's a little video of a hologram of a bear skull. So this is an Ice Age bear from a cave in Mexico. And we scanned the bear, brought the data out so people could look at it with the glasses. But if you see on the other side of this kind of see-through table, the table's a hologram, the bear skull's a hologram, but behind the bear, there's a dark area. That's the actual cave where we scanned the bear, which is here at this location. And here, my Mayan guide is wearing the HoloLens, and he can actually see the skull projected in front of him, between him and the archaeologist, who's the man on the right-hand side. So only the people wearing the glasses can see it. And then finally, another place where I do a lot of work is in the Bahamas. And here I work with climate scientists who are interested in learning about what the Earth's climate was at other times. When this cave had no water in it, when ocean levels were lower, the rainwater soaked through the ground, it dripped from the ceiling of the cave to the floor and then piled up these formations, kind of like icicles or candle wax piled up, one drop of water at a time. Now, these caves have been dry 3 times in Earth's history. So we have rock formations on top of rock formations on top of rock formations. And within these rock formations, we find some materials like what you see that's orange and red in this slide. And what that is a very small sediment, this red dust, that actually came from the Sahara Desert. It got up into Earth's atmosphere and blew across the Atlantic Ocean, and the rain carried it down to the surface of the Bahama Islands so that it soaked into the ground and ended up in these caves. And we can find the red Sahara dust inside the rock formations in this cave in the Bahamas. And we can bring the rock formations out of the cave and cut them open and look at them much in the same way we examine the rings of growth inside a tree trunk. And we can count back in time, and that's how we know that this particular cave is 350,000 years old. So studying different areas of science inside of caves is an incredible privilege for me. And as an artist, documenting these things is such a thrill, because the Earth is 70% water and our bodies are 70% water. And so we're all intertwined. And for me, bringing back images from these faraway places to show people how they're connected to these caves is an incredible privilege. So that's where I'm going to stop the visuals in my presentation, and I'll hit stop share so that I can answer some of your questions, because I know there are going to be plenty after that. Anything goes about caves, about fear, about the science, or about explorations. So go for it.
Okay, so that was absolutely phenomenal. And just to be able to see the inside of the Earth from your perspective is a real privilege for us. So thanks, Jill. Someone asked, have you ever been diving in Jordan? Have you ever dived in Jordan in the Nile River?
No, I haven't. I've been in Egypt. And so I've done quite a bit of diving in the Red Sea, as well as on the other side of Egypt, in the desert where it connects to Libya, right on the Libyan border.
Wow. Wow. So that's incredible. And what is your favorite place to dive from Charlie and AJ?
Yeah, thanks, Charlie and AJ. It's so hard to choose. There are just so many amazing places to dive all around the world. But honestly, if I could only ever dive in Canada, that would make me so happy, because I love diving in Canada. I spent a lot of time in the north, and there's so much to see underwater and so much to listen to underwater in the Arctic. I really love that. And I really love the West Coast as well, where I get to swim with sea lions underwater and other animals as well.
That's, yeah, and it is such a beautiful country. We're so glad that you said that. Charlotte and Isaiah want to know a little bit about your equipment. because when you were down with that rebreather,
Oh,
it
yeah.
was so heavy. Like, how do
Yeah.
you manage that on your own?
Yeah. So most people, when they learn to dive, they just dive from a scuba tank that they wear on their back and they breathe from the scuba tank. And when they exhale, they make bubbles. So the reason why I use the rebreather is that it recaptures those bubbles so that I can use them again and again. And it scrubs it clean of carbon dioxide and it gives little micro injections of oxygen into my life support because it's making up for the oxygen molecules that my body has used. So that rebreather, it's worth taking all that weight because it extends the range. I can go deeper and I can go longer dives because of that equipment. It is heavy when I have to walk to the water, but once I'm in the water, everything is designed to be what we call neutrally buoyant. And what that means is like a ship floats on the surface, right? But a rock, when you throw it in the water, it sinks to the bottom. Well, we want something to just stay in the middle of the water column without floating or sinking. So that's what neutral buoyancy is. So it means that you feel weightless. It means like you feel like there's no gravity. And so for that reason, I can swim hundreds of kilograms of equipment through the water at a time.
That's pretty incredible. And I think we did a session with an astronaut, and he said that astronauts have to have that neutral buoyancy as well. And explained
Yes.
that all astronauts have to become scuba divers first. So
Hmm.
that was a good
That's
connection that you
right.
made for
Yeah.
them.
And a lot of the science that we do, yeah, a lot of the science that we do connects outer space with inner space because those animals that I showed you are probably the closest relatives to what we might find if we find life in space. So that's why astrobiologists are really interested in the life in caves too.
Awesome. Um, I have from Shauna and Kieran, you talked about the rebreather letting you go deeper and longer. So what is the deepest and longest dive you have ever done? And then the average
Yeah.
length of your dives.
Hmm. Well, my average dives are 1 to 3 hours at a time underwater. My deepest dive is 140 meters deep, and I've been several kilometers into the planet, like on branching conduits, like the caves branch off like the branches of a tree. And my longest time on a mission was 22 hours. 22 hours.
Yeah, and you described that so well in the book. That was
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
amazing to read about. Aubrey's concerned about the stalagmites
Mm.
in the cave. Do you take them or do you just take pictures of them? And would it hurt the cave if you
Mm.
did take a sample?
Oh, what a great question. Thank you for that. So they're very fragile. They're like crystal. And so we're very careful not to break them. Once in a while, like once in a very long while, we get permission and a special permit to bring one out, one special one out for a scientist, like the scientist that wanted to cut it open and see how old it was. But they're rock, so the cave doesn't feel it when we break it off. But we don't want to damage it because we want it to be like an underground museum. If anyone else ever gets the chance to see it, we want it to be as beautiful as when we saw it. So we try to keep it as pristine as possible. And that's true for everything underwater. We don't bring things up from shipwrecks, we don't bring things out of caves, and we don't bring animals out unless there's like some special permit for some absolutely important aspect of science. What a great question.
Isn't
Very
that
sensitive.
wonderful that they respect the earth so much to think about that?
Yeah, yeah.
AJ and Charlie would like to know what's the craziest animal that you've ever seen, but I'm also going to ask what's the most dangerous that you've ever
Yeah.
photographed? You have a photograph of that.
Oh, well, I think the most dangerous thing that I've ever done was I got in the water with polar bears and walruses to film them for a documentary on climate change. Now, you can actually see that documentary. It's called Under Thin Ice, and you can get that on CBC Gem. You can stream that for free. Or if you get back to the classroom, you'll be able to stream it on Curio. There's also an app called Discover the Arctic, and it's good for Mac and it's good for Android, and it's free. You can download that online as well, so that you'll be able to see us swimming with polar bears. It's crazy, and with walruses. So I think those are the most dangerous. I think my favorite animals are sea lions, and I've swam with like 50 or 60 sea lions at the same time. So they mob you. They like to nibble, and they grab my head. They drag me to the surface, and once they even punctured through my suit. They didn't hurt me, but they did make a leak in my suit and filled it up with ice water.
That would be very cold.
Yeah, it was very cold.
Um, Alec and Elise asked, have you ever gone diving near Iqaluit? That's where they live. And also Kieran
I have.
live near Iqaluit, in Iqaluit.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have been diving near Iqaluit, and then also even further north in Baffin Island, like Pond Inlet and Arctic Bay, and I've spent a lot of time camped out between Baffin Island and Bylot Island on top of the sea ice, on top of the land. And I think that's one of the most magical places on earth. And I am so happy that you don't have any of this virus up in Nunavut right now. Otherwise, I was planning on being in Nunavut right now on the sea ice. But we're so happy that you don't have the virus yet, and we're not coming this year to hopefully protect you. But we hope to see our friends there next summer.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And I'm sure that they'd be thrilled to meet you. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Charlotte Hoffman mentioned she had a question about shipwrecks. Could you have share about shipwrecks and diving for shipwrecks?
Yeah, I do dive a lot of shipwrecks. Like when I first learned to dive in Ontario, we got to dive on 4 different shipwrecks on the very first weekend that I learned to dive, which is amazing. There's a lot of great shipwrecks to dive in Canada. I go and I dive shipwrecks off Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as off the West Coast and all through the Great Lakes. I've dived shipwrecks that sunk in World War II and even older shipwrecks. I dove on a shipwreck that's almost 2,000 years old. That one's in Croatia in Europe. And that was a very, very old wooden boat. And I got to dive on that. So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that could absolutely incredible. Lee has a question for you. Jill, you use such poetic phrases like swimming, oh, the chat's moving, swimming through the veins of Mother Earth, and we intertwined in this dance of life. Do you ever write poetry about your dives?
I do. For me, diving is such a spiritual thing. I'm way more comfortable underwater than I am on land. In fact, gravity's not very good to me on land. I've rolled a car, I've fallen off a motorcycle, fallen off my bicycle. I'm much more graceful underwater, and it does feel quite spiritual to me. I feel like I'm going back to the very roots of life especially when I'm in a cave underwater.
Oh, that's beautiful. And Lee, as we said, the book is quite something, and it would be something you'd love to read, and I'll just send it to you. Lee, this is interesting from the kids in Iqaluit. Have you ever dived the Franklin ships and the Titanic, of course?
Yeah, so the Titanic is too deep for diving. You can go there with a submarine, and I haven't been there yet. I haven't done the Franklin ships either because only a very few people have had the privilege of diving on those. They're very, very closely protected because they're so important to our cultural history. And so I hope they remain very carefully protected. It's so important, you know, to all Canadians. And then also, it's important to the Indigenous people as well, because they are the ones that helped us to find them and knew through storytelling passed down through generations, where they were. And that's a wonderful, wonderful story.
It is a beautiful story, and something that I just learned about a little bit last summer when I was up in Baffin Island. Char, this is a great question. How do you become a diver? We have boys and girls who are now connected with you and probably inspired to learn. How do you become a diver?
Well, when you're 8, you can start diving. When you're 10, you can actually take a full certification class in diving. Um, Now, there are like scuba instructors and stores around the world that can teach you to dive. But the first step is actually doing some online education. If you go to a website called diveraid.com, all of the e-learning on that program is actually free. So if you want to start reading about how to dive, you can start there. But yeah, an instructor can help you, because the next step after that is to get into a swimming pool and learn some skills. And once you've perfected those skills, then you go to an open water location where you do 4 dives to become a qualified diver. It's so much fun. And as you can see, there's a lot of science and art you can get involved in if you become a diver.
That's and you can learn different things too, like how to dive at night. Maybe you can explain some of the extra things that you can do once you've
Sure.
had that qualification.
Yeah, there's all kinds of specialty education. Like you can learn how to be an underwater photographer like me, or an underwater archaeologist, or a marine biologist, or you can just learn about different environments, night diving, diving in currents, deep diving, or rebreather diving if you're really interested in the technology. So for me, there's been just a lifetime of learning since my very first class. I took a lot of other classes over the years, and then I also learned a lot on my own. So I'm kind of self-taught, and I learned a lot of things off the internet just from going on YouTube and learning about new aspects of diving into technology as well.
That's awesome. And you turned your hobby into a job. So how
Yeah.
did you go from who asked that? AJ and Charlie wanted to know, how did you go from
Mm.
doing diving as something that you loved as a hobby to a job like you have now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you might be surprised to learn that my university background had nothing to do with diving or science. I am an artist, so I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Communications Design. So I'm an artist. I like to paint and draw and do things like that. And so the diving came after that. Um, and yeah, I started diving, and I slowly worked my way towards becoming an instructor. And by the time I was an instructor, I thought to myself, wow, I really want to make this the job that I do every day. I still want to be a creative person, but I want to be creative underwater. And so I sold everything I owned. I sold my business, and I moved to the Cayman Islands, which is in the Caribbean, in order to work on being a better photographer, on working on instructing people in diving, and just improving my skills. But the most important thing I did to make this a career is that I started researching different aspects and learning new things, but I volunteered. So every single opportunity that I got to turn this into a job started because I volunteered for an expedition or a project. I volunteered to help somebody with some aspect of their scientific work. And that's how I met people that helped me to become the diver that I am today. Now, here's another tip. Um, there is a scholarship program that I'm a part of for the Women Divers Hall of Fame, and it's WDHOF. So that's the short form for Women Divers Hall of Fame, WDHOF.org. We're giving away 20 scholarships for 20 young women that want to learn to dive this year. And so um, the winners get a check that will cover, $500 in training and $500 in equipment so that they can learn to be divers. So there's lots of grants and things out there, and scholarship opportunities and places that you can volunteer and meet people. And then when you have experiences like that, you just reach out to them and you ask that question that you asked me, which is, how do you get to do this?
Which is and
Yeah.
I'm writing these things down, and the students know that I mentioned to you, we'll put all of this on the website so that you'll have access
Great.
to it if you want to remember. Charlotte,
Yeah.
And Isaiah would like to know, do you have pictures of the crystal caves in Bermuda in the slideshow? We've been to those caves and have seen divers there,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we weren't sure what they were studying. So
Mhm.
what might they have been
So that
studying?
there was a picture with the two big giant mounds. It was the most beautiful, probably the most beautiful picture there. That's actually part of that cave system. And I had a special permit that for only a half a day that allowed me to go in there and photograph that location, because that location is not open to divers usually, but that is a part of what's connected to the Crystal Caves of Bermuda. So I think those are some of the prettiest in the whole world.
And what would they have been studying there?
So in Bermuda, we've done a lot of work on the biology of what's swimming inside the caves, because Bermuda is kind of a hot spot for cave adapted life. And the animals that we find in these caves are really important to our understanding of evolution and survival, and also understanding the quality of the water is extremely important, because because they rely on that to survive. And those animals are what we call endemic. Endemic means that we've only found them in one location on the entire planet. So some of the animals that live in those caves we've never found anywhere else. So really important.
Oh, that's incredible. So maybe
Mm.
Charlotte, when you go back, you'll see some of those animals and think about what Jill said.
Yeah,
Charlie and AJ want
yeah.
to know if you've ever gone diving under Vancouver and under the mountains.
Oh, so there are caves inside the Rocky Mountains, and I haven't done those ones, but I have some friends that have been inside of those. They don't go underneath Vancouver, but they are up in the mountains. Yeah.
Awesome. And one thing that I'm sure that the kids haven't, I'm sure they thought of it when they were seeing you go through those caves and everything was so close and right above you. Do you ever get scared or worried?
Always scared.
Oh,
So
can you
I
tell
think
us a
being
little bit
scared,
about that?
yeah, being scared is a really good thing. It's natural, it's normal. Like if you watch that video and went, oh, I would never do that, I'm claustrophobic, that's okay. It means that you care about coming home safely at the end of the day. So being scared means that you care. And so I like to encourage people to do things that scare them, because you might never be a cave diver, but you have something in your own life that feels like a dark, black, frightening cave. And if you step towards that and go into the darkness to do something that you've never done before, experience a place that you've never been before, that's where you have the opportunity to be an explorer like me and do something that's new for you, or maybe even new for humanity. And that's incredibly exciting.
Well, that sounds great. And I love that advice that just doing something that even if you're a little bit scared, I think Baz Luhrmann said, do something that scares you every day. um,
Absolutely.
Katie
Yeah.
and Evan, and it's Evan's 13th birthday today, want to
Happy
know
birthday.
what's the biggest challenge you had to overcome as a diver, number one, and does being in a small place space affect you?
I think some of the challenge that I've had have actually been partly because I was a woman, and not because I couldn't do things that men could do, but because there were stereotypes. Like people assume that a woman couldn't do what I do, and so they sometimes didn't consider me for jobs and opportunities. So I think some of the greatest challenges came from being a woman. But there's no reason why women and men both can't do this. We're equally able to do things like that. So I think that's been one of the bigger challenges to get through. Yeah. So, oh, and
And
happy birthday, Evan.
and
And was
does
there was a second part to that question
yeah,
too, wasn't
does
there?
being in a small space affect you?
Oh, it does not scare me at all. I've always liked small spaces. So I was that kid that would build a fort under the table or in the cupboard or something like that. I like small spaces, but not all caves are small. A lot of them are quite big, and you don't have to go in small spaces just because you're a cave diver. So if you don't like them, there's still lots of big spaces like the one behind me that you can swim through.
So I think that's pretty, those are, if anybody else has some last minute questions, I think we got all of the questions that the boys and girls had asked. And this was just an incredible opportunity, Jill, for us at Connected North at home. And we're really thankful that you took the time. Mums and dads, I do encourage you to read Jill's book because it is an amazing story of adventure and exploring. And Shauna has two things to say to you, and then I'll finish up.
Yeah.
How many dives have you logged?
Over 8,000 dives. So it's a lot of dives.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And Shauna would also like to invite you to her class when you go to Iqaluit. And
Oh, fantastic.
I can tell you, she is an incredible science teacher. We have so much fun together normally in Connected North. So, another couple questions came in. Sorry, two more. What is your favorite dive?
My favorite dive. Oof. That's so hard to say because I like so many of them. But maybe the sea lions in British Columbia would be right up there. Favorite. Yeah.
That sounds really exciting. And Charlotte asked about your most dangerous dive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think swimming with the polar bears and the walruses for sure. I'm not sure if I'll do that again, but it was an incredible privilege to have done it once. Yeah.
Did they come pretty close to you?
Yeah. In fact, the polar bears were literally like chasing us, and what we would do is as the polar bear came very close on the surface of the water, we'd dive deep and film the polar bear above us from below, because the polar bear can't go as deep as we can. So yeah, they were chasing us.
And that's in the movie Under Thin Ice, right?
It is.
Okay, so we'll definitely put that in. And I guess the very last question is, have you gone diving in the Nile River? We talked about the Nile River yesterday.
Yeah, not in the Nile yet, but in the Red Sea, so pretty close. And the Nile's not really known as a diving destination, but the Red Sea is really good, and it's pretty close.
That's on somebody I know's list to go diving in the Red Sea. So Alec, can we say thank you. It was a special privilege to hear from you.